First, I just want to say that this meeting's being broadcast live today. There is an opportunity for members of the public to submit any questions live at the meeting. And the meeting is also being recorded and will be uploaded onto the CCG website. I also would like to note a change in the membership. Thank Jonathan Bates, who was the Senior Responsible Officer for Primary Care, who's now handed over to Mark Krillman, who's taken on this role, in addition to the role as Locality Executive Director for Wandsworth and Merton. And I think we've also got Ashley Hayward and Gary Bradley, who've joined us today, who are going to present the item, the workforce item. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
I understand people were concerned about acronyms. Apparently on the website there is a glossary acronym buster, so if you need any help, try to go there. I think we're all here to be correct. Welcome. I'm going to move on to declarations of interest. They were available in everyone's papers. However, have any of the members got any other interests to declare not already registered? No? Good. Right. Thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting dated the 16th of September. Do we want to go through them? Are people happy? Let's just have a quick look through the papers. Page 2, where the minutes probably start. 3, 4, 5, 6, or if you're looking at it in a different guise, 11, and 7. I think they're okay. Can we sign those off then? Yeah. Sorry, what was that? I can't hear. That was okay. Right.
Yep.
Right. Okay. The next item is a report that went to the governing body. I'm not going to talk about that. That should be just a reflection of the meetings that we've already had. But has anybody got any questions? Oh, I've just noted in the chat room there's a slight amendment that Liz and John's affiliation to boroughs is the wrong way around, Kings and Richmond, but perhaps we could just make those changes. Sorry. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Questions on what I think is footing? Oh, we're whizzing through the agenda. Excellent. More time on the important areas. Okay, so the first main item is titled Primary Care Resilience, and this is a presentation to set out how primary care are working around practice workforce. And I think we've got a set of slides, and that Ashley and Gary are going to do this, or are you going to start, Andrew, in terms of...
Thank you. No, I'll hand straight over to Ashley and Gary.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we're just sort of working on the right slides at the moment. It seems to have the minutes of the meeting rather than the slides that you want, but welcome.
Thank you. I'll just introduce myself. My name's Ashley Hayward. I'm Primary Care Transformation Manager for South West London CCG, and I'm here with my colleague, Gary. Gary, did you just want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, I'm Gary Bradley, and I'm supporting Ashley around workforce.
Welcome.
Thank you. Did you want us to share the slides? Because I think someone was trying to project them a minute ago, but they weren't.
They look like they're coming up now, so
they're up there.
You'll just need to direct the changes. Thank you.
That's fine. So we're just going to talk to you a little bit today about primary care workforce. So this is just a bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Gary to talk you through some of the sort of staff wellbeing support that's been put in, and some of the work that we're doing to support general practice under the resilience scheme. So there's a huge amount of work that goes on around supporting general practice workforce. So we just thought we would talk to you about some of the main bits today. If you can just go on to the next slide. Gary, I'm just going to hand over to Gary to talk a little bit about staff resilience and wellbeing.
Right, if you just move on to the next slide, please. Sure. Right. Hi, everyone. The coronavirus pandemic As workforce teams and individuals into different ways of working, and our people are our most valuable resource. There's some staff who've been personally and professionally affected at home and in the workplace. Although health and well-being has always been a priority in workforce planning, in the current climate it is more important than ever that we support our staff's health and well-being during COVID and help them move forward again after COVID towards normality. We want to give a brief overview of some of the activities and resources, both national and local, pulled together to help support the health and well-being of staff at individual, team and organisational level. All South West London practices have carried out risk assessments, including BAME and in relation to increased COVID risk, and training hubs have supported borough teams and federations to provide staff wellbeing resource packs that offer advice on self-care, personal health and wellbeing, team and organisational resilience, as well as links to all other support services. Other examples include commissioning online mental health first aid courses for general practice staff to train mental health first aiders across PCNs. One of those is the mental health first aiders course. We see this as sort of a knowledge and training to sort of like set up some sort of buddy system in which it gives staff the practical skills to spot the triggers and signs of mental health issues, confidence to step in, reassure and support a person who may be in distress, enhanced interpersonal skills such as non-judgmental listening, and the knowledge to help someone recover their health by guiding them to further support, whether that's self-help, through their employer, the NHS, or a mix of all. Also, there's the Pulse People's NHS Survey, which is a national online survey developed for all NHS provider and commissioner organisations to support local listening and engagement activities. Results will provide a national, regional and local view of employee experience and wellbeing. Examples of questions are asking employees how they are responding to the pressures during COVID and recovery at work and at home, how they are supported, motivated or anxious they may feel, and what other support would make the biggest difference to their experience at work at this time. Could I have the next slide, please, Joe? So if we look at support at an individual level, this can be caring for yourself. It may seem obvious, but these are the basics of resting, eating, drinking, exercise, daylight, control what you can. Don't worry about things that are beyond your control. Accept that worry is a normal part of this time. Use a mindfulness application to help you overcome how you may be feeling at this time. Also, there's Silver Cloud, which is free mental health support for all NHS staff. It can be accessed by a website in the resources, and it's around sleep, learning how to fall asleep faster and stay asleep with healthier habits, stress, managing stress and learning new coping skills, and resilience, enhance your well-being and your ability to bounce back from challenges. There's also individual coaching and support for clinical and non-clinical staff. Support is available to all clinical and non-clinical primary care workforce, either employed by NHS or contracted to deliver on behalf of the NHS. The aim is that this will provide staff with opportunities to process experience, develop coping skills, deal with difficult conversations and develop strategies for self-management in difficult circumstances. And it's been developed in collaboration with the Royal College of GPs. Unmind is a mental health platform empowering staff to proactively improve their mental well-being using scientifically based assessments, tools and training. You can measure and manage your own personal health needs. Headspace, a science-based app in mindfulness and meditation, providing unique tools and resources to help reduce stress. At a team level, we encourage daily and weekly catch-ups, not in a formal setting, but something that everybody has access to. No fixed agenda, but it may be a general catch-up sort of thing. be aware that people who don't engage in these catch-ups, that might be a sign of any particular personal trauma that they may be going through. Signposting to external wellbeing resources and support, ongoing awareness and active monitoring of mental health and wellbeing of staff and teams. And then again, after COVID, maintaining check-ins, which may be needed less frequently, however important to acknowledge there may be later presentations of psychological distress and deterioration in mental health. And from an organisational level, the return to work, organisation may wish to consider team as a whole and different ways of bringing staff back into the workplace, alternating teams on different days so that less people are in the workplace but still overlap with others. Personal development projects. These can be mini projects which refocus and align with corporate strategy while offering personal development and growth within the organisation. And finally, a recognition and thank you. A thank you to staff who have gone beyond to support the team and the organisation. That is my part, and if I can just hand back over to Ashley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That was really helpful. So yeah, we've done a lot of stuff, and our training hubs in particular across Southwest London have been really instrumental in pulling all of that stuff together and making sure all of the resources out there for staff to access so that they feel supported and know where to go for help. To sort of expand on that a little bit, part of the work that we also manage is around supporting vulnerable practices through the General Practice Forward View Resilience scheme. So in 2019-20, we supported a number of practices through challenges. We offer support such as the bullet points you can see there, so CQC preparation, organisational development support, any sort of additional clinical software training, IT support and one-to-one practice manager support. The programme was really successful last year, and this year we are looking at how we build on some of that work to offer practices support in line with what they need now, given that they're working in a very different way. So if I can just go on to the next slide, we have worked with our training hub leads and our colleagues in the contracting team, and we've sent out a self-nomination resilience questionnaire to all practices. So far for this year, we've had 22 practices self-nominate, which is an improvement because I think last year we had 37 and this year they are new practices. So that's always a good benchmark of the impact you've had with the resilience scheme, is you don't want to see the same practices coming through time and time again. So it's quite encouraging for us that they're new practices this time. We've identified a number of support areas and we're currently in discussion with our borough team colleagues around how we move some of that forward and start getting that support out to practices. We're also looking at a wider offering of resilience support, so some sort of new ways of working, webinars and some sort of change management webinars at a higher level that all practices in South West London can access, just so that they can have a chance to step back and think about any vulnerabilities that might have been highlighted as we've worked through the sort of COVID-19 period. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. So one of our big focus areas is around general practice retention. So this is retention of all staff within general practice. I think, like Gary touched on, this is an issue with the sort of problem that we were focusing on before COVID, but now there's sort of even more reason to try and support staff and help them to be retained within the system. So we just thought that we would pull out some of the really successful retention schemes that we ran last year, just to sort of talk to you a bit about those. So we did an induction programme. So these are programmes of work that we manage via our training hubs. So there's a training hub lead in each of the boroughs, and these are sort of programmes that are offered out via them. So the induction was really well received. This is about giving a South West London induction to all new staff in primary care, so that they can really understand how the whole system works, as well as being inducted into their local areas. And these were really well received. I think you can see some of the feedback on there. Those are going to continue for this year, but obviously they've been tweaked now so that they're all online. They're also recorded so that if there's not an active session being planned when your new colleagues join, you can show it to them, so it's a sort of sustainable programme. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Another part of this is our fellowships and our SPIN programmes. So these are about newly qualified GPs and general practice nurses, and the programme offers them the opportunity to have some time out of the practice, which is funded, to go and work in another area of the system, just to get an idea of how broad their roles and their careers as GPs could be, and the different sorts of specialist or commissioning areas that they might want to get involved in. And this is just about offering a more varied sort of general practice or general practice nurse role to try and encourage that retention within the system, to stop them sort of going off and wanting to work in other areas. It's been really successful, so we're running this programme for the first time. It started sort of late last year. We've got 27 GPs that have signed up for year one of the programme, and we'll be doing another intake in January. We're also having a look at how we might focus some specific digital fellowship resource to sort of support some of that wider change management that's happening out in general practice at the moment, with all the changes around like video consultations and online consultations, and how we might get some more people, clinicians, interested in that. If we can go to the next slide. The GP mentorship programme is sort of focusing on the more experienced GPs, so ones that may be coming up for retirement or thinking about leaving, to offer them, so they'll be reimbursed. This is just about reimbursing them some time to do coaching and mentoring development, so that they can offer mentorship to our GP fellows as part of the fellowship programme. So we keep it all nice and local, and it gives us the opportunity to retain some of that really good knowledge in the system before we let our more experienced GPs away. So this is also being run by our training hub. So Wandsworth is our lead training hub for South West London, and they are leading on both the fellowship programme and the mentorship programme, because we're going to make sure that those are linked together, like I said, so our mentors are giving mentorship to our GP fellows. We didn't have any, in fact, GP nurses sign up to year one of the programme, but what we did get was quite a lot of interesting feedback on why they hadn't wanted to do that. So we've done quite a lot of work with HLP and HEE to try and make some changes to the programme, so that we will hopefully get some interested in our January intake. That would be really nice. If we can go on to the next slide. So this is just some of the bits around general practice nursing. So as a sort of operational group, the CCG with our training hubs, we also meet with our sector lead nurses on a monthly basis, just to keep in touch with what they're doing around supporting the sort of general practice nursing workforce. They do a lot of work towards supporting the delivery of the 10-point plan, but this is just to highlight some of the work that's going on. So they do a big focus on health and well-being. They do a big focus on supporting the next, I guess, generation of leaders. They run masterclasses, and they just do a lot of that preceptorship support for nurses across the patch, and they work really nicely as a unit and sort of all get together and bring their issues from their areas. And we're looking at how we can work with them more closely, so that we can make sure the work that we're doing is complementing and supporting the work that they're doing across the patch. Next slide, we're nearly there. This is just a bit of focus around our non-clinical staff development programme. So there's a lot of development opportunities and support in place for the non-clinical workforce to develop their career, and again that aids with retention. There's been a bit more of a focus now around supporting those staff to manage difficult conversations, sort of manage burnout and anxiety, and to support them with remote working, which is obviously something that's very, very new to general practice. These are just some of the headline, I guess, examples of the things, the support programs and the courses that have been run in this sort of non-clinical staff development area. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's far too many, but there's just lots of development opportunities there for them to sort of have career options available to them, and it just gets people thinking more long term. If we can go on to the next slide. This is just something that we've been looking at, and we've got one of our Darzi fellow clinicians that came to work with us last year and has stayed on to lead on this piece of work. We done some engagement with our PCNs in January this year, which feels like a lifetime ago, but we got lots of feedback on the sorts of things that our PCNs would find useful in terms of resources to support them with recruitment. So we're just doing a piece of work now to pull in resources like job descriptions, links to HR advice, access to data and reporting and best practice, just to pull that all together so that when they're going out to recruit, particularly around the additional roles that are being introduced, because we're just aware that practices will not have recruited to those roles before, so they may just need a little support around doing that, and then going on from there how they support and embed those roles within the practice. This is sort of still being developed, but we'll be happy to come back and talk through this in a bit more detail once it's been worked up. We're looking at how we can do also some of that support around locums, because locum support is something that's a big agenda item at the moment, and I know there's a lot of work going on at the South West London Federation Alliance to support that, so we're also looking at how our programmes of work can support the locum workforce as well. If we can go on to the next slide. This is just a little bit about our training hubs. So just for those that don't know, just to explain what a training hub is. So training hubs, they provide the infrastructure for all of the training and education in primary care, and they work closely with us as a CCG on GP forward view initiatives to support retention, returning of staff, and recruitment of new staff, as well as that education and support. We're quite lucky in South West London. We work really well with our training hubs, and they work really well collaboratively as a unit. They've been really crucial for supporting staff, particularly through the pandemic. And we just want to build on some of that now and carry on working as a nice collective group. Again, just the next slide is just a little bit more about training hubs and how we work with them and with HEE to support them in terms of their development as mature organisations. So this just gives a sort of overview of where our training hubs across South West London are in terms of where they sit in their levels of maturity. This sort of came out of a piece of work that was done with NHS England that said they needed to have a bit more accountability and a bit more direction, which is working really well. So it's just about making sure that we're targeting the right support in the right areas. And like you can see, that's all green on the screen there, so we're doing particularly well in South West London. And I think a lot of that is a testament to how well we all work together as a collective. If we can just move on to the next slide. These are just some of our workforce summaries. So for 2020-21, some of the bits that we're running or looking at running, those plans are being worked up now. We're looking at how we put in some support around succession and retirement planning. We're looking at some of the bits on there around GP support packages and some peer support to those new additional roles. So paramedics, pharmacists, care coordinators, how we make sure that the peer support is in place for those. I won't go through again each one in turn, but there's also some bits on there about the inductions and how those have been adapted this year. And then just the final couple of slides are just some of the reporting. So we obviously try and track the impact and the delivery of the work that we're doing to support the workforce and the work that we do via our training hubs. So these just sort of give an idea of the events or the courses that have been held by the training hubs. I think this data is April to June, so this is just to give an example, so you can see there's lots of different bits that have gone on there. And then the next slide, if we can, is just some data around the South West London Training Hub's educational webinars. So the training hubs worked to deliver these throughout the pandemic so that clinicians, GPs could still get access to clinical education. So these are going to continue to run. As you can see, they've been really well attended. At times we've had up to sort of over 200 attendees on those. So we're going to continue running those. GPs have found them really supportive. And I know other clinical colleagues have come forward and said they found them really useful. We've had lots of different topic areas covered, and they're normally done in connection with the acute. So the consultants come in and do a talk, which is normally really well received. And that's sort of the end of our slides. I know that was a lot. There's so much that happens around workforce. It's hard to sort of know which bits to go into more depth about. I think one of the things I would say is if there are any areas in particular, I know we've done quite a big focus this time around staff wellbeing and practice resilience, but if there were any other areas that you wanted us to come back and maybe go into a bit more depth about, then just let us know. But if there are any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley and Gary. That's really, really helpful. It's very impressive to see the amount of collaboration taking place and the positive feedback that you're getting about all the different organisations supporting practices and their workforce. I can see that you're, got a big programme of work going forward, and you've obviously done some work in the past, but it's we're going to open up to some discussion in a minute, but the challenges, it's interesting to get some reflection back on the challenges that primary care are identifying that they want some support with, and good to know that once you've been able to intervene in supporting resilience, that they're not necessarily that cycle, obviously over a few years, working out what the issues are, because I'm sure practices go through different cycles and will have different issues that need to be addressed. Before we open it up, is Nicola on the call? I wondered whether
I am here.
you wanted to add anything to the presentation in terms of your insights, primary care lead.
So actually, Ashley said there's an immense amount of work here. That's a huge understatement. It's a massive amount of work. We've got, and in a surprisingly small team of people as well, really. And I think the kind of impact on general practice has been really significant. Staff aren't used to having access to all of this. It's excellent. I think people have really noticed and have and practices now think of how they can support their staff and train their staff and all the health and wellbeing stuff, which has really taken off during COVID. It wasn't really recognised as a thing before with general practice staff. There's like a bit of a family kind of atmosphere in some general practices, and some are a bit bigger and more corporate. So there's a whole range, and there's been a real variety of approaches to how staff are managed in their jobs and their careers, and this just has added quite a lot of structure to it, which I think is really welcome. The resilience stuff has been really important. If you talk to GPs in practices and practice staff, they don't recognise necessarily that is what they've had. They wouldn't say, "Oh, we were supported through the resilience programme." They would probably say, some folk from the CCG have really helped us out with this because it's been really difficult and challenging. They've helped us get through it. So it's I think maybe we could do a bit more with the branding of it in practices so they recognise what it is, but it's there and there's no doubt that people recognise it.
Okay, great. So I'll open it up. John Anderson, you had some questions you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I've got a couple of detailed questions which I'll save for afterwards, but this encourages me to ask a more general point about whether PCMGs, locally PCMGs, will have an opportunity to talk about their workforce issues, because obviously looking at Ashley's slides, the position varies a little bit borough by borough, obviously, and at PCMG level, the baseline workforce data, how many GPs have we got, how many do we need, all that sort of data is quite significant and important for people locally. So a general question is, do PCMGs locally have the opportunity to talk about these issues, or is everything happening at the CCG level?
No, so I would say there are definitely local conversations. We, as a South West London CCG, we have access to the workforce reporting data, so we can sort of see what they can see. But it's in terms of the system collaboration, I would say it's an iterative process. So we say we've looked at the data, this is what NHSE have said, this is what's going on more strategically, and then we get that sort of feed up from the local to say, well, actually this is particularly happening in our area and this is our particular problem and our networks need help with this, and then we try and bring it all together so that we've got that strategic alignment, but we're also addressing the local needs in each individual borough, which, as I'm sure everyone can appreciate, are relatively nuanced depending on where you are. So we do try as much as possible to take that into consideration. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually asking whether PCMGs, when we next meet at Richmond level, for example, will we be able to talk about workforce issues in that forum?
Well, perhaps,
Yeah.
John, but hold that for later on in the agenda when we've got the reports from the different groups. That might be a good idea to hold on to that.
Okay.
Les, do you want to raise a point?
Yeah, just two things. One, are you carrying out any exit interviews for people that are not being retained, as it were? That's one question. And the other one was about the fellowships. Is that offered to people who are just newly qualified, or is it beyond that?
So I'll take the first question. Sorry, remind me what your first question was. My mind's gone blank.
Exit interviews.
Exit interviews, yeah.
People leaving.
So yeah, we do try. So I know that each individual practice will have their own sort of strategy. And last year we worked quite closely with our training hub in Richmond to do a sort of investigative survey and one-to-one interviews with people that were leaving and with people that were coming up to retirement age to understand what support might they want to stay in some capacity in the system, what their reasons are for leaving, and if we really can't retain them, if they could give us sort of a what could we have done differently to support you. So yeah, we are trying to collate that information. That all got a bit interrupted by COVID, but the report on that should be with us by I think the end of the month. So we'll be happy to share some of the information that comes out of that, because I would imagine that would be quite interesting and will give quite a lot of insights there. Your second question there about the fellowships, it's all newly qualified GPs and GP nurses. So off the top of my head, I think that means that they've qualified in the last 5 years. I think what put GP nurses off was there was some differences there around whether you worked part-time or full-time, and we fed that back that it wasn't very attractive for those people that were in part-time roles, so we're trying to work on that so it's more inclusive. But it is offered to all newly qualified GPs and GP nurses. They're all offered some sort of fellowship, access to fellowships.
Sorry, Les, Ashley, may I just come in on that? So the first round was offered to those under 5 years, the GPs, but actually there's been phenomenal uptake. It's been amazing. And the next round is restricted to those who are in their first year. So it's to draw people in. And I think this is really important. If you draw people into South West London in their first job, you know, you stand much more chance than if they get settled somewhere else and by then they have kids, schools and all, you know, much less likely to move into South West London. So I think that's quite a good strategy.
Yes, but I think it's also, after you've been in the job for a short period of time, I mean, 1 or 2 years or something, you realise that there are things that you'd like to develop. So that's partly why I was asking. But yeah. I mean, you know, it's a two-edged sword. But anyway, that's great. Thank you.
I think there was a point in the chat, wasn't there? Julia said, is this a wider issue than just a South West London programme?
Yeah, it's a national programme, and I know that there was some, that I think the comment in the chat was around whether there was any overlap with the new to partnership payment scheme, but my understanding of that is that that is open to everybody that wants to go into partnership. It's not necessarily just for newly qualified GPs. So yeah, but I'm happy to take any sort of questions offline and we can have a look at anything that's happening and make sure, but we are plugged into the national programme, so we make sure that what we're doing is aligned with that rather than as well as or separate to.
Bruno, you've had your hand up for a long time. Sorry, do you want to make it?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's an amazing amount of work there, Ashley. I was interested in understanding whether staff feedback was embedded in all elements of the work which is done and what it shows, because both I imagine that will be reflected in retention of staff, and the other thing is that it's a useful marketing tool in and of itself, the feedback which there is from people who participate in programs where they're successful. The other question I have is whether there is in fact similar levels of support where voluntary sector organisations are used as subcontractors within primary care, for instance in social prescribing, and how that might work.
So in terms of the voluntary sector staff, I know that there is a huge focus on the voluntary sector and how we sort of all work together. I know that in the coronavirus response, I know that training hubs and federations worked really closely with their voluntary sector colleagues to mobilise support for shielding patients, and I know that there is an appetite to sort of continue to build on the good work that's been done and how we sort of play that forward. Sorry, remind me of your first question again. I'm not doing very well.
It was around whether staff feedback was embedded in all elements of these kind of areas of support and what it shows because of the usefulness of that.
Yeah, so for all of the courses or events or sessions that are run by the training hubs or by the CCG, we do collect feedback at the end, so user experience feedback, and obviously we play that in when we're evaluating courses in terms of how many people have attended, how many people have stayed the duration, what the feedback has been, and we try and use all of that to say, yes, this was really successful, let's go again, or actually there are bits of this that haven't worked, let's change it. And we also have that sort of link in with colleagues from other STP and CCG areas so that we make sure we're sharing that learning. Like, so for our induction program, for example, we presented that to a group, the Workforce Delivery Group, which is like a sort of regional meeting. So all of the STPs across London meet there. So because that was working particularly well for us, we demonstrated that to them. That's been taken up in other areas and they will come and do the same. They'll say, look, we've been doing this, it's worked really well. So there's that good sort of shared learning of best practice and learning from each other's mistakes. So you can also go and say, we did this and it was awful, don't try it, these are the pitfalls, so that you're not, repeating the same things over and over again. So yeah, we do try and play that back because there's so much of it, it's hard to collate it and present it in a way that's useful. That's why I think if there's a particular thing that people want to have a deep dive into, then we can collate all of the user feedback for that and bring it back. And I think Gary also touched on so they've got one primary care network in Southwest London that are piloting the People's Pulse survey for NHS staff, and that really is about general practice staff being given the opportunity to say what their experiences are of working in general practice, how they feel and what they feel could be done to support them more. So hopefully that will give us some good insights as well into how, I guess, the impact of the work that we're doing now and how we can build on that going forward.
Thank you. William, you've had your hand up for a while as well, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So it was really just to remind the committee, obviously, resilience, maybe not the right word for this, but again, the team have done a massive amount of work on this. So this originally started back in the day beyond when NHS England came up with the Resilience Fund, which allowed practices, and some of you who sat on primary care committees will remember those conversations with what support those practices that had been identified by CQC. I think what we've been able to do in South West London with that small pot of money is to be able to really come up with innovative ways of supporting general practice to remain resilient on the ground rather than on a per se just handing money to practices to sort financial issues out. So I think the team should be really commended on the kind of the support package that is being developed, and not only it's iterative. So every year there's a conversation with practices. Every year there's a conversation with a training hub of what can be done, what the opportunities are. So we are not commissioning sessions or training sessions that could be gained from somewhere else. So the money that we've had in South West London, we've done a massive amount of work with practices that is spread it across. But actually, what Ash and the team have done is to pull all of these various different opportunities and pots into one place. So as a practitioner, I can actually go through it and they offer to practices in one place, because the way it comes out of the system, unfortunately, is a one here, one there, and actually it's kind of disjointed. But actually we've tried to kind of pull that together, and the team have done a really good job on being able to set out when a practice states we need some support for resilience. And here's the menu that you can choose from to support. So again, like I said, it's a really good program and very well led and pulled together. So thanks, Ash and Gary and the team.
Thank you.
Okay.
Julius, did you want to pick up on your point in the chat? Is that what you want to? Julius, did you want to? make a
Yeah,
point?
thanks very much. I absolutely support what's being done, but I just wanted to flag up to colleagues the last point I've made in the chat, which is that it's all very well supporting GP practice staff, but if we can't maintain the leadership within practices, which is the partners within practices, then we're in a very perilous and sort of precarious position. So I don't want to take away from any of the support that's being offered, and I think the training hub offers are really important. But that is why the New to Partnership scheme was introduced by NHS England. It's the first time there's been a specific support for partner recruitment. And there's a moderate, slight overlap really between the fellowship scheme and the New to Partnership scheme, but I just wanted to flag up that was going on in the background with the LMC from Wessex and ourselves, and we've had a lot of interest really. So we are keeping in touch with the training hubs in relation to that programme, but it is a bespoke programme specifically for new partners who've chosen, and as Nicola said, as long as they've never been partners before, then they can join that scheme whatever stage in their career. However, the second set of figures I put up in the chat there demonstrate to you that we are not addressing the underlying problem of supporting leadership within general practice if you define leadership as partners within practices, and I think most people would recognise that that's an absolutely critical part of sustaining the partnership model if you wish to do so, and that is not working as yet because we have seen a fall in the number of full-time equivalent GP partners for the last 5 years, so the last 20 quarters since September 2015, those numbers have fallen. So I don't want to cast a cloud over the work that Ashley and her colleagues are doing, because I think it's really helpful and important, and clearly general practice isn't just about partners, but it has to be about partners as well if we're going to maintain the current partnership model, which I think is of benefit to all patients. So a slightly mixed set of comments from me, but I hope that gives the committee some perspective there.
I think what you've raised for me, Julius, is an important issue, is that we're looking at a really important bedrock for staff in general practice, but we do need, and it's already very collaborative, isn't it? But we just need to make sure that we're not missing any gaps in that. But there's, as my limited knowledge is that there are a myriad of people looking at workforce issues from a professional standpoint, as well as from this sort of multidisciplinary organisational basis that we seem to be looking at here. And I can imagine you've got fantastic networks going on. So, and the LMC is obviously a key player in that as well, presumably in London as well as in Wessex. I think that was the point Nicola was making in the.
Yes, I think Susan, the point you're making is absolutely right. There are a lot of people working on it. And the evidence of the last 5 years in relation to GP partners is that they're failing.
So that's the gap that you're identifying. But what's the vehicle for moving that forward then, Julius?
It's a huge challenge, and I don't have the answers. All I can say is at the moment, it would appear that being a GP partner is not a job that is attracting people into the workforce as partners. And I don't know, because it's multifaceted and it's not, just about money. In fact, I would say it isn't about money. It's about workload and liability and responsibility that's expected of partners. And some of the programs that we've seen that are really helpful, for example, the additional role scheme under the PCN DES, it's really helpful in recruiting colleagues to general practice and to the wider practice team, but it still places additional responsibility and oversight on GP partners as the responsible employers in practices. So it's a really, really tough one, and if I had the answer to this, I would be in a different place, probably.
I thought you were going to give us the answer, Julie.
No, I don't, but I wanted to give some balance here. We hope that the New to Partnership scheme will start, and it was specifically identified as a project by NHS England that uniquely points to new partners, and we hope that will be an opportunity. And across Wessex and ourselves, which are big areas, Wessex for colleagues is Hampshire, Dorset and Somerset. We've got over 150 expressions of interest, so it's really encouraging because most of those are new partners, and that is really, really encouraging. And obviously that will apply to there's an opportunity in Kingston, Richmond and Croydon as well.
Thank you for that insight, very helpful. William, you've still got your hand up, is that a new one?
No, so it's a new hand, Chair. So again, it's just to also on the point of Julius's around the partnership model. Obviously, you know, it is very much up to the partners or the contract holders in the practices to take on partners, and I totally get the bit about there aren't doctors that are interested in taking on partnerships, but where we have practices that are having partners leave or move, we often try and encourage them to take on new partners, and that's not a very easy thing to do either. But certainly, again, I wouldn't want the committee to think this is just down to the lack of doctors. There is also an element where some of the practitioners, rightly so, need to how do I put it, kind of support.
What I'm saying, William, is they need to step up to the plate.
They need to step up their plate, but also they need to be happy that they're going to take you on to be a partner as well in your business. So it's a hard one to crack. So yeah,
it is. It needs to be a plate that people want to participate in.
Agreed.
Yes. One last comment, Mark. You wanted to make a comment before we move on.
Actually, it's probably a bit of a question, and it follows on from Julius. So with the additional roles, have we identified a need out there in primary care to kind of like support not just the recruitment of those roles, but also the ongoing management of those roles, because they are different disciplines, different kind of supervision, etc., etc., etc. So just a comment really from Ashley.
Yeah, so we're doing that as part of the work we're doing going forward. So I think last year we started a paramedic and a pharmacist and a physician's associate sort of peer support forums, and making sure they've got that access so that they're not put into general practice and then feel isolated, because they've given that opportunity to raise issues with colleagues or talk about maybe if they feel like their skill sets are not being utilised in the right way, they get that access to sort of education and further development. So we are looking, those were quite successful last year, so we're looking at building on those to include paramedics, care coordinators and some of the other roles, just so that they have that access to peer support and that wider, I guess, like retention, how do we keep you happy in your jobs and what that looks like. And I know that, so in Merton at the moment, they're doing a pilot around paramedics and how those are shared between the primary care networks and the acutes, so that there's a sort of varied role there for them. Obviously, we don't want to create instability in the system either, with everyone fighting over the same members of staff. But I guess there's that bit there that comes out of the peer support forums where we look and say, right, what are the issues that they're bringing? What are the topic areas and the themes of those problems that they're talking about? And how can we make sure then that ongoing support is in place for them? So obviously having access to a peer network is important, but it's then how do we, I guess, harness the information that comes out of those to say, okay, how can we address the problems that you're having? How can we support your practice managers to utilise your skills properly and embed you within the practice and the network and make sure you're keen and interested in your job?
Thank you. You asked us about whether there are any areas that, you know, we'd like some feedback, and just picking up on Bruno's point, I think that the two areas for me that you've highlighted today, the well-being and the change management, are sort of critical elements in terms of coping with this, the environment in which practices are dealing with at the moment. So perhaps outside the meeting we could have a conversation about what that might look like in terms of some feedback to us. I'm particularly interested in, you know, also not only have we got COVID, but we've got a whole sort of culture of collaboration and system working that's going on, as well as change management within a sort of practical sense within a practice. So maybe on another occasion we could come back and talk about some of the feedback that you're getting on that and what impact it's having. Because overall, workforce is one element of the whole resilience programme for general practice, isn't it? And I think it would be interesting for us to have an understanding of how we measure the changes in resilience. So workforce is one bit of it, but estate might be another, or IT might be another, or recruit, and those sorts of enablers that make practices work well. I think it would be useful. So it's but lots of questions in my head, really, Ashley, rather than necessarily answers, not things that you can necessarily answer. But I think that as a primary care commissioning committee, it would be good just to understand that how the investment is having an impact on improving resilience in general practice. But thank you very much, Mark. Did your hand down there for a particular reason? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. You can stay or you may go, but we're going to move on to the next item. But thank you very much, Ashley and
thank you. I'm going to drop off if you don't mind, not because I'm not interested, but because I'm on leave. So I'll see you all later.
Well, thank you very much for being here. That's very helpful.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye. Right. Thanks, everybody. The next item is the GP Access Survey results. I've got two presenters down here, Nicola and Mark, is it?
So, Susan, shall I just kick off and then I'm going to introduce Paul, because he's going to go through the results with us. But I haven't got much to say at the start. I might pick up after Paul has completed, really, just to add a bit of a perspective. But just to say, this is the annual GP patient survey that happens nationally across England, and the results go back to individual GP practices, and this is a collation of all the results at South West London level, with some borough take on it as well. So I'll hand over to Paul to let him go through some of the results and then come back in.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there. Hi, thank you. So I just wanted to give an overview on the work that the South West London Primary Care team have done to review the results of the 2020 GP patient survey. And I've prepared these slides, which hopefully everyone has had a chance to review. And I'll just give you a brief summary of these. So the slides are provided today for the committee for discussion and just to approve the recommendations. So on slide 2, this just gives some background on the GP patient survey. So for those who aren't aware, it's an England-wide survey which is used to gain patient feedback on their GP services. It's administered by Ipsos Mori on behalf of NHS England. The survey is randomly sent to 2 million patients each year in January, giving patients until March to respond. The survey is just one indicator of what we look at when reviewing practice quality and performance. It's not just used to focus on practices whose achievement is lower than average, but also for highlighting those practices who are doing well and identifying areas of best practice. So just moving to slide 3, as you'll see on slide 3, the South West London CCG had the second highest response rate of 27%, compared to 33% for Hayward CCG. The national response rate was 31.7%. The slides give an overview of the South West London achievement compared to the national average and the other London CCGs, and also against previous year's achievement. Overall, South West London has achieved well compared with the other London CCGs. On slide 4, you'll see that we've reviewed 8 questions from the survey, which, as these provide a good overview of practice performance. And the same questions were also used last year. Achievement for each of these questions is shown on slides 5 to 12. And what we've done is we've used a RAG rating. So for amber is for where borough achievement is the same or between national and CCG average. And for questions 1 to 6 and question 8, red is lower than CCG average and the national average, and green is higher. For question 7, green is lower and then red will be higher, as this question relates to patients' experience of practice being closed. Just moving down to, I won't go through each of the slides in detail, but moving down to slide 13, you'll see this gives a breakdown of the achievement by borough across South West London. And as noted, South West London has achieved well compared to the national average and the other London CCGs. However, some further work is recommended with practices to improve achievement for the next survey in the following areas: improving the experience of making appointments, appointment wait times, and the ease of getting through by phone. Currently, the data has been shared with the SMT in the primary care cell in September, and the borough level data has been shared with borough primary care management and quality groups. The borough teams have already begun to review practice level data and work with their practices. No contractual action has been identified across South West London. However, the South West London primary care team will support the borough teams to work with individual practices to help identify issues and develop action plans to improve achievement in conjunction with any other concerns that may have also been identified. And that just brings me to the end of the slide. So if anybody has any questions, and also just to ask the group if they're happy to approve the recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Has anybody got any particular questions that they want to raise, pick up on any of the issues?
Susan, can I perhaps just add a bit of a reflection on the kind of the importance or relevance of this and the work that we might do following it up. So, I mean, I think we can say that this is a positive result. You know, this is great. You know, we're doing well against national. We're doing really great in London, which is very important because, you know, general practice in London has you know, some similarities with other areas of the country, but there's quite a lot of differences as well. And it's really great, really encouraging. This was before COVID, so next year's might look really different for a whole host of reasons. Let's look forward to that. I think that's going to be quite important. This is not the most highly regarded mechanism for getting patient feedback when you talk to practices. The response rate is in line with what surveys like this often are. You know, it's not bad. But when you look at practice level data, it's very difficult to draw major conclusions from it. Sometimes there's an important trend with time that might be important when we collate this, but, you know, down at practice level, it doesn't really feel that important. It's not nearly as impactful for practices as their own surveys that they do, which are much more comprehensive and focus on the organisational aspect of the practice and the clinical care aspect as well. And practices would set much more store by those. You know, I think that's just sort of put it in perspective, really. However, I do think the actions from it are very, very sensible. This is a work that we would want to do. The work actually is going to be much more important considering what has happened in the world since the results of this survey, since this survey was done. So phone access for me is one really, really important thing. It's a very, very important route into the practices already. And now when you've got much less online bookable type access or you know, bookable in advance type access, it's really changed what practices might need to do with their phones. Their telephony services are increasingly important, so it's a great time to do that work anyway. So perhaps we can work with practices to you know, get that in as good a shape as possible. They're already working on this, their world has changed, so I think that's really, really critical. So I think that I'm very happy to answer other questions on the kind of more detail of that, but please do open it up now.
I'm glad you said that, Nicola, about the sort of the recommendations in terms of putting it in a context now of a very different world we're moving forward to. So it would be good to think about when we're approving those recommendations that they are embedded in lots of the initiatives I know that you're already doing in terms of looking at how we can support practices at this time. But thank you for that. There's a number of questions. John Anderson, you wanted to?
Yeah. Thanks. So a couple of points of detail, but first can I just say that, excuse me, the South West London position does seem to, as represented by this survey, it does look really, really good. I'm very happy to see that and to acknowledge it. I do, though, looking at slide 13, seem to be some issues around practices in Merton, where there's a number of, I mean, I know these numbers are not far away from the target figures, but nevertheless there are some red flags in Merton 1, and I was particularly interested in the fact that everyone, all areas seem to be hovering around the low end of the question about practices being closed when people contact them. And given what Nicola's just said about the importance of phone lines in and so on, I'd be interested if you could just unpick that a bit. What does that actually mean?
Catherine, I think you had your hand up. Did you cover Merton? Would that be something you could cover?
I was going to comment on this actually. So I think to some extent it's building on what Nicola said in terms of it's really important that we view this as one part of a suite of kind of quality quality information that we can use to kind of understand how practices are performing and what the quality of care they're delivering is. So I don't think this should be taken in isolation in any way. Nevertheless, we do know we have a pocket of practices in East Merton, one in particular, that are very, very challenged and have been for the last few years. So that's for a whole suite of reasons. They're in a very deprived area of the borough. There's a lot of small practices with only 1 or 2 partners. One of them had a really significant issue last year where they nearly had to close because they lost one of those partners. And I suppose we're very conscious of that and have been really proactively working with them locally through both our practice support team, but also as a CCG borough team and with the South West London contracting team as well to try and address that. So I think whilst these results are still disappointing, I would hope that actually we will start to see some improvement now we have some of those proactive measures in place that Nicola's talked about and that we heard about from Gary and from Ashley earlier. I think in terms of the access point in particular, again, that's something that we know has been a particular issue in Merton, but we've introduced various new schemes over the last 2 years, in fact, to bring additional same-day access online across all practices. And that pocket of practices in East Merton are now very engaged in that work as well. So again, I think we're on the right track with it, but we'll live and see what happens next year, I suppose.
But I suppose what you're saying also is that this is a reflection, as you say, of the 2019 people's reflections from January to March, right? Okay, so actually knowing those things, as you say, we good to see what sort of impact other changes have taken place and what impact it's having on the practice. Great.
Susan, can I just just to explain how the survey works? So people are sent the survey if they had an appointment with their practice at some point in however many previous months. They might only have had one appointment and they might not even remember having had it, you know. So it's quite difficult to think actually, it might not be an accident that the Merton looks in red there, given that we know there are some issues there, but actually statistically it possibly could be an accident, you know. It's really difficult to know.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yes. Andrew, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you. So I think this has been said represents a moment in time, and that moment in time was before COVID. And as we know, the world has changed since then. So we certainly don't want to wait for whatever survey comes out next winter, springtime. So we are doing a lot of work, a lot of insight work, and in particular with health watchers, just to try and understand the impact that COVID has had from a patient's access perspective. So that's particularly as NHS England are very keen on saying having to be virtual by default for all sorts of perfectly sensible safety reasons, but we're trying to understand in different pockets of patients and different cohorts as well what the impact of that has been. So really trying to get under the skin of any unforeseen consequences. So we have a work train that I think kicks off last week. We have a GP clinical lead for it and a full-time project manager, and they're going to be working with not just colleagues from Health Watch, but other community groups as well. And of course our community engagement teams to really try and work with specific practice, specific PCNs who maybe just want to reflect on the good that's happened, and clearly there has been an awful lot of good that's happened, but also to look at some of those unintended consequences. And that can be anything from how a practice looks and feels open, right the way through to some of the phone lines. And I know we're doing a lot of support around the digital telephony to try and improve not the bandwidth, but try and improve the resilience in a practice. Right the way through to looking at people who perhaps traditionally just used to walk into a practice and just used to get an appointment, or perhaps just had regular routine appointments, and what that means from a patient perception, but also from a clinical perception. So we've got a whole range of different work that we're about to kick off. It will really start with building on the insight work over the last few months from a number of colleagues and stakeholders, and hopefully try and form a series, I imagine, of wide-ranging recommendations, support and guidance to patients and to practices.
Okay, thank you. William, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so it was just following on from kind of again from what Andy was just saying. I think this survey, yes, although we come out third in London, which is nice to see, it does need to be taken with a pinch of salt. And I think access means a lot of things to a lot of people. From point of view of what do you mean by access? And I think, as we've just said, I think the results going forward will be very different, because as Andy was saying, we've put general practice for a good part of 3 to 6 months in online or on the telephone. So I think the results, if this is run again this financial year, then I think we'll have very different potential results. But it is managing kind of the expectations of what do you mean by good access.
Okay, Bruno, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up from what Andrew was saying, and I was just wondering whether or not the work that he was describing, which is about the current picture, whether that links into borough level work which is being done by other stakeholders around digital exclusion, because obviously that's a major kind of concern with the current epidemic and the way that working practices have had to change around things.
It absolutely will do. We've got a huge variety even between boroughs, within boroughs, let alone at the South of London level. So it clearly needs to be sat extremely local, and obviously try and aggregate it upwards, because I'm sure there are lots of good things that we can share across the patch as well. So it's about trying to get that balance right.
Mark, do you want to say something? Go on.
I suppose it's just building on Nicholas. I think one of the really important things is how we are engaging and involving our patients at a practice level, and kind of that's a really important mechanism that we need to, post-COVID, make sure that practices across South West London are focusing on some of that. And we've had really good feedback from patient and public involvement groups about the power of that mechanism. So it's just to build on that, really.
Okay, Les, was there anything you wanted to add? Are you happy? Fine. I'll assume no comment is fine. One of my questions is that we're being asked to approve some recommendations, which, from what you're saying, seem to be very pertinent and relevant areas, though they are quite vague in terms of what you're actually going to be doing about them. So maybe we could build into the work programme some feedback on how those recommendations are being taken forward and what the expectations are. Would that be something that we could reflect on, Andrew?
Yes, that's perfectly sensible. I think just to say that clearly the work that Katie, for example, has described is already happening. So we haven't just sort of waited for this meeting. It's really been over the past 4 months, I think, when the results were published, to take it through the local PCMG results. I don't think there are any surprises in there for us, but it is really about building on the work that the local teams have been doing, but also, as I've just outlined, recognising that COVID has changed how patients access and the different definitions of access as well, and try and start a big work programme around that, which I think we will again look to bring through here and obviously through other routes as well in time.
And I hear what Nicola is saying, and that is just one set of data amongst a range of data that you're looking at to look at what needs to be put in place. And so I'd rather see those as particular work programmes as opposed to just a response to this survey, that these are important issues that we need to be tackling. So perhaps we could build that in. That would be great. Okay. Right, thank you very much, everybody. If there's no other questions, we'll move on. The next item are the reports from the Borough Primary Care Management Groups. Just to prove, I have read them all, and it was very helpful to get an insight into the breadth of work that's taking place, and some of the insights around the PCN development. Lots of examples of great collaboration across primary care as practices work together to respond at these challenging times. And I can also see there's been a significant amount of work supporting practice business continuity, driving forward the quality improvement, which we looked at the last meeting, and some of the transformation. Given that the two areas that we've heard about today around workforce and about access really for patients, it would be helpful if perhaps, rather than go through the reports in detail, if each area wanted to sort of perhaps comment on some of the examples of the challenges and successes that you've been able to work on really around those two themes. Would that be possible? I'll put you on the spot here. Sorry, I couldn't give you any warning, but I can see that some of those are in the notes, but just to perhaps elaborate on those particular points would be helpful. And then if there are any other questions, we can pick that up at the end. So though the reports aren't in this order, on my crib sheet, I'm going to go down Croydon first. So who's here from Croydon? We just
Hi, it's me, Fozia. I'm Fozia Harrington. Hi, Chair. I'm Fozia Harrington, the interim deputy director for
Welcome.
Primary and Community Care. And I will start with saying I'm the interim, and I'd like to just report that we have our substantive person joining us on Monday, which will be really helpful, providing a bit more stability for the team. So Aisha Patel starts on Monday. So I just want to reflect, and you want particularly to hear about workforce and access. So what I will do, can I hand over to someone else first, and I will just and I will do a bit of scribbling and get my head and thoughts around that first, if you don't mind, Chair. Yes, please, if you don't mind, and I'll get my thoughts together.
Okay, well, Catherine, since you had the floor before, do you want to sort of pick up that, and we'll go to Merton and Wandsworth then?
Oh, that's Foz. That's really unfair. Yeah, so that's fine. So if I talk a little bit about access, I suppose we haven't picked this up sort of at the last PCMG meeting, so it's not reflected in the report, but I think it's fair to say we're doing a lot of work around particularly the digital access side of things at the moment. So many of you will be aware that we have a programme called Digital Accelerator in South West London, and Merton and Wandsworth were pilot sites for that last year, and this year we've been working on kind of rolling out some of the learning from last year to other boroughs as well. But we've got a number of pilots running in our PCNs across Wandsworth and Merton, specifically to try and improve digital access for patients, and so that includes a suite of different things. For example, encouraging rollout of online consultations in a consistent way across all practices. Andy mentioned a programme of work that's around telephony and trying to improve the resilience of practices' telephony systems, so that actually, you know, if they need to work remotely, for example, there's a really rapid way that they can switch that on and start to actually have their reception staff working from home, but can still access all their calls and all their systems as they would if they were in the practice. One of the other quite notable kind of things that's starting to show some success is we've got two PCNs who are piloting an e-hub model, and that's basically where the practices have come together to share their back office functions, so that actually they can build some additional resilience. So rather than all individually answering their own calls, they have a single call centre. All the calls come into that call centre, and then they can direct patients accordingly, you know, whether they need an appointment, whether that can be at their local practice, or indeed whether they can actually channel that to one of our local access hubs as well. So that's something that we're looking to continue to pilot over the next 6 months, with a view to, so we've got a detailed evaluation in place that's being supported by the Health Innovation Network, again with a view to being able to roll some of that learning out, hopefully across South West London, providing that it is successful. From a workforce perspective, so clearly the team at South West London level are leading huge amounts of this. But I mentioned just now that we've got this kind of pocket of practices in East Merton that have been particular, I guess, have had particular workforce challenges, and we've really been working closely with the South West London team to make sure that they have access to things like that resilience pot of money that we talked about just now. So there's been some real targeted work going on with those practices in those areas to try and make sure that actually they've got business continuity plans in place when they need to, that they've got succession plans for their partnership arrangements. And actually we had a particular success over the summer whereby a practice that was potentially going to be closing because the partnership had decided to retire, they were actually taken over by the PCN as a whole, and are now being run really successfully by the primary care network in that area, and that's one of the ones that we think we'll hope to see some improvement in over the coming year as well. So yeah, just some practical examples, I guess, of how we're taking forward some of that work.
Brilliant, very helpful indeed. Yes, Omi, did you want to do Kingston and Richmond?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Susan. I don't think I'll go over some of the kind of areas that Katie has just mentioned, particularly around digital and resilience and things like that. But I would focus on two key areas, some of which are set out in our PCMG report, but I think particularly around access of services for patients that are in vulnerable groups. We've done a significant amount of work locally around the patients with SMI, learning difficulties and dementia. We're working really closely with our mental health team, the local authority and practices to kind of ensure that where we do have those services in place, they are focusing really clearly on those vulnerable groups that are going to be most impacted due to the pandemic. So there's a significant amount of work going there. We've employed short-term some staff who will be going out and supporting practices to identify these cohorts of patients, support them in capacity to enable them to call those people in and carry out the reviews. And that kind of links in quite nicely to the second part, which is the work that we've been doing with each clinical director in the primary care network around the additional roles reimbursement under the primary care network DES. Really trying to focus on two elements, I'd say. One is the delivery of the specs that are set out in the DES, but two, how could we use some of those roles at the moment to focus on the vulnerable groups and the other areas of access that need to be stepped up as set out in the phase 3 letter. So I think between those two elements, I can go into a huge amount of details, but I think for now, I think that covers off the two kind of main areas we've been focusing on in Richmond and Kingston.
Thank you very much. Sian Sutton, do you want to comment on Sutton's response to those two areas?
Yeah, so we've been talking to our practices, and particularly across the PCNs around their resilience, but also thinking about how they how we can ensure that patients are responded to and trying to keep them out of hospital. So we've been working with St Helier to look at the patients turning up at St Helier Hospital at A&E and designing a scheduling system, so both for booking into ED, but also so that people presenting at St Helier with primary care issues can be booked by them into GP practices. So that work's ongoing and is a really good piece of integration work. Another thing we've been looking at oh dear, Sian. Designing, very much led by the. Oh, am I still here? Yes. Let me turn my video off. It might help with my Wi-Fi. We've been redesigning our acute home visiting service, which was previously provided as a GP-led service and launched this week as a paramedic-led service, which then gives the opportunity for those staff to be funded through the additional role reimbursement scheme going forward. And that has been designed in partnership with Sutton Health and Care, which is our sort of community-based service, so that we have a much more integrated model than we were running previously, so that it really sort of is integrated with that the community rapid response community nursing service, so that we're not running in parallel, we're running very much an integrated service. So that would be really interesting looking forward. And then from a sort of quality perspective, we've also been looking at cancer, and particularly cancer screening and cancer referrals. That you'll be aware from the press that there's been it's sort of been in the press that people aren't coming forward with cancer symptoms, and we haven't particularly seen that in Sutton, that our rates have stayed quite steady, but we are having a focus on that at our quality meeting in a couple of weeks' time, just to make sure that we really are making that we're still doing screening at the rate that we should be doing it, and that those referrals are going into hospital where it's appropriate to do so.
Okay, thanks, Sian. Good diversity. Fozia, do you want to cover Croydon now? Are you happy to give us an insight?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, apologies for that. It's quite similar to what others have talked about. We are working with. We had really helpful, as you saw, the practice visits, which raised a number of issues, and we're reflecting on those at the moment, which address a number of workforce and access issues in terms of their ability to to get back to pre-COVID activities, as well as supporting through winter and through COVID. So the sorts of things that we're looking at around how we potentially use some underspend to support practices in terms of accessing additional workforce to ensure their resilience through winter. We've also we've worked significantly over the past few weeks with IT and Sam Ball and her team around ensuring that IT is adequate and up and running to enable remote monitoring, to enable that access through winter and through COVID and beyond. So that's been a really positive piece that's come out, and we've seen a shift in terms of our ability to access sort of the IT necessary. Also, it would be fair to say we're looking at our extended access capacity and how we ensure that we're using that effectively going forward. And in addition, the PCNs have employed their ARRSs, and we're looking at how they potentially can support through winter and provide that additional support going forward. So I think, and in addition, similar to others around the resilience funding, we have worked with practices who have very specific issues to support them with a number of workforce issues.
Thank you. I know I put you all on the spot, but I think that was actually really helpful and gave an insight into such a vast range of different approaches. But I know that all of you are, working really hard and connecting in terms of supporting our practice. So thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions as a result of the borough reports that you want to pick up? I can't see any hands going up. So you've obviously, given us. Oh, Mark's going to say something.
So I suppose it's just from a South West London perspective. I think that the one-to-one visits have been really, really invaluable across the whole of South West London, from both a kind of management point of view, but hopefully in terms of us supporting general practice, and certainly the ones that I participated in. It was a really kind of partnership approach to actually making sure things like access was in place, whether it be video, online, or indeed face-to-face. So I just think everyone should be congratulated in getting those one-to-one visits done throughout a very, very busy time, really.
Thank you. Les, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not specifically. Can I echo what Mark just said, though, because I think one of the big problems when South West London was being started was actually getting the GPs to understand the belonging and what South West London might do. And I'm quite sure that visits and actually engagement that way goes a long way to pulling the whole thing together. And it's very good to hear that they're doing their PCN bit and they're getting practices taken over by groups, because I think that's the way forward, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks. Well, we note those reports, and thank you very much for all the work that you've been doing. That's great. The next item is public questions, but I don't believe that. Have we had any, Andrew? I think
no, we haven't.
No. Okay, fine. So, is there any other business, Andrew, that we need to cover?
No,
Mark.
Can afford about. Thank you.
Liz, no. Okay. Well, then we'll close the meeting, and you'll be pleased to know you've got another half an hour extra time to do your work. And we haven't got a date for a next meeting yet. Given the situation that we're facing with the pandemic, we're going to be quite flexible. So thank you very much for coming today, and we'll be in touch and let you know when the next public meeting is.